you want to be inspired by extraordinary courage and real-life stories? Well, you've come to the right place. It's a good place where truth and integrity meet. Every week, I introduce you to thought-provoking and compelling premier educators, whistleblowers, best-selling authors, journalists, activists, and celebrities, and they all have one thing in common. They are people of truth and integrity, and many are considered modern-day heroes. Before we get started, I'd like to read a brief bio about my guest. His name is Mr. Blake Percival, and Blake is considered to be one of the most important whistleblowers of all time, even winning an award for his bravery. What he did was expose dangerous flaws in the nation's security clearance system. Prior to that, Blake graduated high school in Montgomery, Alabama in 1984 and served 6 years in the U.S. Army, where he was honorably discharged at the rank of sergeant in 1992. He then worked as a police officer in West Virginia and Alabama. From 2001 to 2011, Blake worked for USIS, also known as United States Investigation Services, where he rose through the ranks to the position of director. USIS was a company contracted by the government to conduct national security clearance background investigations on prospective and current federal employees. Blake became a whistleblower in July of 2011 when he exposed that USIS was billing the U.S. government for background investigations that allegedly had not been properly reviewed. For 4.5 years, Blake was not even allowed to talk about the case, but once it settled in December of 2015, that changed, and he was featured on the front page of the Washington Post as a whistleblower. Blake is now sharing his experience in his new book, Holding On to Integrity and Paying the Price, a Whistleblower Story, which is due to be released on March 2nd, 2020. Blake is the founder of the Whistleblower Assistance Fund and donates a portion of the book's proceeds to help future whistleblowers with financial needs during the legal process, which can take years. Blake now spends his time speaking regularly through the United States on leadership, integrity, business ethics, faith, motivation, and is considered a leading authority on the vetting process and investigations. Well, what an honor to have you here again, Blake.
Thank you, Ella. I think it's been just over a year since we last talked.
Yeah, it has been. And I know you've been a busy man, and we'll get to that as well, and your book too. Can we start about what happened when you became an employer of USIS and what led to the whistleblowing experience?
Sure. Yeah. So, we all have our story, and to me, I was just an average guy, just trying to make a living, trying to provide for my family, and I found myself in something that I just couldn't stomach, and I stood up for what I thought was right, and kind of the way it started was most people, I guess I need to lay a little groundwork. Most people didn't even know, or don't even still know, what USIS was or that it existed. You see, in 1996, our Congress, while trying to streamline our government, formed a private company called USIS, or U.S. Investigation Services, and they were tasked with doing just about all of the security clearance investigations for people to see classified material and the background investigations for anybody that wanted to work for the federal government. And from 1996 until 2014, USIS continued to do the bulk of those investigations. I had worked as a police officer in 2 different states, and went to work with USIS in January of 2001. And when I went to work for them, quite honestly, I would not have gone to work for a private company had it not been for the specific relationship that USIS had with the federal government. And by that I mean that my background, police officer, U.S. Army, military police, it led me to believe in the badge that I was carrying and the work that I was doing. And so, like I say, that's the field I had chosen to work in, and I would not have gone to work for a private company if it wasn't for the fact that this private company held this special place within our government. And, if you met me or another U.S. investigations employee doing an investigation, it was always funny to us. We would leave and people would describe us as the FBI was just here or the CIA was just here because we carried a federal badge and credential, and people, you know, never fully understood that we were a private company doing work for the government. And so anyway, in January 2001, I went to work for this company, and I started as an investigator in Montgomery, Alabama. And you know, at the time that I started with the company, I think they only had about 750 employees. And I covered pretty much all of central Alabama, and I would travel around and do these background investigations for anybody that needed a security clearance. I did that for a couple of years, and then I got promoted within the company, and I moved up to the position of district manager. And the position that I took was in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and the office was in Virginia Beach, and I covered the state of North Carolina, and I think I had about 70 investigators at that time. USIS had really grown after the September 11th attacks of 2001. You know, they went from about, like I said, about 750 employees to about 2,800 employees in that time. And so it allowed for me to progress within the company, and I found myself in Virginia Beach. And while I was in Virginia Beach, the company went through some changes. The original founder of the company stepped down, and they brought in new leadership who had been leadership with GE, and they brought in the mentality that we needed to change from being, you know, quasi government to realizing that we were a private business and we're there to make money. And you know, I understand that, and at the time I was somewhat dismayed by it because, like I said, I never would have gone to work for a private company. I mean, I was there to do, you know, the good things that investigators did. And so anyway, so when they made that change while I was in Virginia Beach, I guess I'd been there about 2 years. I decided that I didn't want to be in management anymore. I stepped down from being a manager and moved back to Montgomery, Alabama, where I'm from, and I took a leadership role in Montgomery, but it wasn't management. It was called a team leader, and I was in Montgomery, and I had about, I think, 23 investigators that worked for me. We covered central Alabama, and you know, they would come to me with questions that somebody that's done the job longer would know, and so yeah, I mentored other investigators and did that for a couple of years, and then you know, I got the itch to move up within the company, and kind of what I was feeling was, you know, while I might not like the fact that this company has moved to more of a business mindset, if I was in management, maybe I could affect, you know, the changes that they were making. So I volunteered and put my hat in the ring for a position that they had opened, and I moved from Montgomery to Minneapolis, Minnesota. I had never been to Minneapolis before, and being a Southern guy, they sent me up there in April. And you know, if you want somebody that's not from the area to think they like Minneapolis, Minnesota, send them there in the spring, because let me tell you, it's beautiful. And so I went up and
very cold in the winter.
Yeah, and you know, I found myself getting laughed at by the locals because you know, they were actually looking forward to watching me go through a Minnesota winter. And anyway, so me and my family moved to Minnesota. I found myself over 4.5 states, 370,000 square miles. And again, I was the district manager. The office was across the street from the Mall of America. It was a very good position. I was making very good money. And I was finding that this was a position that would allow me to be noticed within the company. It was a good position to be in. And anyway, I got recognized for some things I was doing there. And after being there for, I don't know, about 4 years, January of 2011, I got a phone call, and I was offered of the position as director of fieldwork services in Western Pennsylvania, which what that would entail is, so we had these 2,800 investigators across the country going out and doing national security background investigations, and they would assemble reports or pieces of reports, and they would complete the reports on encrypted laptops and then transmit these reports. Well, they were transmitting them to Western Pennsylvania, and if I took this position as director, I would be over a 40,000 square foot facility with 350 employees that would receive these reports. Another section of this operation would reach out to colleges, police departments, and get records of criminal offenses or college degrees, certifications, things that you needed to prove what somebody was putting on their resume and on their application for a security clearance. So, it was a very important job within the company and, within what our government does for security clearances. At the time that I took the position, which I did accept it in January of 2011, the company was probably responsible for somewhere around 60% of all of our country's national security clearances. Between the time when I had started with the company and when I took that position, they had brought in a couple competitors, a couple other private companies that basically assisted USIS in doing security clearances, and USIS still did the review of those reports when they were sent in to Western Pennsylvania. So I took the position, and I took it because I thought it was the right thing to do. And when I took it, I'm glad that at that point, I did not know what road I would have to go down, because, looking back on it, I'm not sure had I known then I would have chosen that road. But we all make decisions based on where we find ourselves. And so, I was told that I had been brought in to streamline the operation in Western Pennsylvania, to improve the morale there. I had a history of doing that and working well with the employees, and that's why I think they had chosen me. So when I got to Western Pennsylvania, I started having small meetings with the employees, and I liked to get 5 to 10 employees together and chat with them about their job, and if you want to know how to fix something, you got to ask the people that are doing it on a regular basis. And so I'd get them together and I'd have these little chats, and I would always drop in 2 questions. And this was the 2 key questions that I wanted to know the answer to in order to help improve this working situation. Because when I got there, this company's Western Pennsylvania operation was losing 20% of their workforce every year to these other competitors, because, we would train them and then the other companies would pull them away. And I had to find out why. If we're the premier provider of security clearance investigations, we ought to be able to hang on to our employees. So in these small little groups, when we would have these discussions, 2 questions that I wanted answers to was, what do you like about your job? And what do you hate about your job? And, I was getting the same answers from everybody. And that's good, because if you're trying to do what I was trying to do, and you're getting the same answers, then you can zero in on what the problems are. But when I would ask the question, what do you love about your job, or what do you like about your job? Every one of these people would metaphorically wave an American flag and talk about the fact that they liked that USIS was one of our country's lines of defense, that we had an impact on the security of the United States. And then when I would ask the question, what do you hate about your job? I wouldn't always get the same answers from everybody. I guess I would kind of say that on the hate your job question, they were kind of scattered. but they were all the same type of things. They were, and I don't mean to demean what people were saying, because they're important. They were important to them, therefore they were important to me. But they were things like, there's not enough bathrooms in the building. The carpets are dirty. Problems with the coffee pot. You know what I mean? I mean, just not really job related things, but that was the things they were hating about doing their job. And that was the type of answers I was getting as I was doing these interviews. And I guess 3-4 weeks into me being there as the director, I got to the point where I was going to have this exact same small group meeting with the two individuals that reported directly to me. In an organization where you're over 350 people, I mean, there were 350 people divided up in groups, and so many reported to so many, and then so many reported up to so many. And when it got up to me, I had two people that fell directly under me. Those were the two people that I was going to talk to this day. And I came in, got me coffee, and I thought this was just a normal day. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be anything out of the ordinary. I certainly didn't expect it to go the way it did. But I asked the question, what do you like about your job? I got the same thing. Both these people, metaphorically waving an American flag, talking about how they love what we do for America. But then when I asked the question, what do you hate about your job? One of those two people said, I hate that we have a process called dumping. I hate that we dump. And I didn't even know what this person was referring to. I had to have this person explain it to me. And when they explained what dumping was, I was blown away. I could not believe that this company that I worked for was placing profit over our country's national security.
For the listeners, can you explain what dumping is?
Yes, ma'am. I will try. It does get a little complicated, but so with any company, there's budgets set, and there's nothing wrong with that. So this company, originally when I went to work for them, they had been a employee stock ownership plan. The employees owned the company. It was set up by Congress that way. Over the years, they'd gone through a couple different sales, and the employees got great rewards from those sales. At the time I found myself in Western Pennsylvania, this company was owned by one of the largest private equity firms in the world. I'm told they had about $100 billion in play, in their investments. And so they would set a budget, and that budget would then be broken down by the quarter and by the month. And what USIS had done was they had set up a system, created a computer system that, going into the month, they knew how much they got paid per investigation, and they knew how many investigations they needed to do in order to make budget. So as the end of the month came closer, they would begin releasing investigations to the United States government as if they had been done, whether they had or had not been done, just in order to make that budget. And prior to my arrival, they had been very successful at meeting budget, because there was anybody that has ever worked for our government knows there's a standing backlog of people waiting to get their background investigation done for a security clearance. So there were always investigations that needed to be done, and so the dump was going into the month. You need to release, and I'm just making up a number, 3,000 investigations. You get to about the 25th of the month, and we've only released 2,500. With this computer system they developed, they would make sure that last week 500 investigations went to the government to be sure they made their revenue. And all those cases that had never been investigated or had never been properly reviewed by an employee of USIS, therefore didn't meet the requirements set by Congress for, the granting of a security clearance. So that's the explanation of what a dump was. It was funny to me when all this started hitting the news, how salacious, that word was, and how all the news loved saying, that USIS would take a dump. So
basically,
anyway.
A terrorist could apply for a security clearance and potentially get employed by the government.
Yeah, you're right on. So if their investigation happened to come along during that last part of the month when, USIS was at the time making sure that they made budget, anybody could potentially get through. And, it's scary to think about, just anybody getting through. So, when this lady told me this, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. And what do you do? I knew, and it didn't take me a second for this to come out of my mouth. I said, we don't dump. I said, if anybody tells you to dump, send them to see me. And I thought I had resolved the situation. I thought that, the buck stops here. I was now the guy in charge. I had said we don't dump. I thought, that would resolve it. I guess that was a little naive of me. I've kind of lived my life by the mantra that, if you do the right thing, in the end you'll win. And
someone had approached you, right? A higher up came to you and said that part of your job was to assist with it. And being the principled man that you are, you refused outright.
Yeah, exactly. So, I always like to point out in my story at this time that I credit how quickly I made that decision without the blink of an eye to deciding ahead of time what your principles are. Because if you don't, somebody else in the heat of the moment will decide that for you. That decision that I made put me on a collision course. And like you said, they came to me, ordered me to dump several times. And I always tried to meet their budget requirements through legitimate means. I would have a pizza party after hours where I would encourage the reviewers to stay and review cases, late into the night and provide pizza for them and pay overtime. And quite frankly, it just wasn't possible to meet the numbers that they were demanding. But,
were you not bothered? I mean, I understand you were bothered, but I mean, how did you go to work? Did you think you could fix it? Did you think you could correct the problem?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming from a standpoint of having, worked in the military, having worked as a police officer, I knew that the first thing I had to do was stop the wrong activity. Thought I had done that. I had given the order, we don't do that anymore. What I found out in hindsight is upper management went behind my back and directly ordered my employees to continue dumping.
Why did they still keep you on board then?
I'm sorry?
I'm just curious, why did they, after they realized that you were not going to participate in this type of corruption, why didn't they fire you at that point instead of continue to let you work for them?
That's a good question. It didn't take very long before they fired me. I think they thought they could win me over to their thinking. And quite honestly, there had been several people in the position that I then held that had either participated or looked the other way. And yeah, I believe that they thought that, when they brought me there, I got a huge raise. And when they fired me, I lost a six-figure salary. I lost, they had given me a $40,000 relocation allowance. I was living in a corporate apartment. I was driving a corporate SUV. I had a corporate cell phone. I had a corporate direct bill American Express card. I kind of felt
You're pretty
like
comfortable.
yeah, I was pretty comfortable. And basically what they were telling me is, Blake, you don't have to participate. You just have to look the other way. And for me, with my principles, that was not possible. Once I knew of a illegality, especially falling in my, area of control, it wasn't possible for me to just look the other way.
And how long were you?
So,
oh, go ahead. I'll let you talk to you. Might be
no, that's all.
We'll be right back after these emergency messages. So hold on, everybody. Whistleblower, Mr. Blake Percival. And before the station messages, you realized, we were talking about this statement I had, you realized practices were not changing, and you found out that they were still going on behind your back. How did you find that out real quick?
Quite honestly, I didn't find out they were still going on behind my back until the federal government did their investigation after I was fired. So, you were asking also how long it took for them to fire me. It really didn't take that long. I had taken a job there in January of 2011, and by May, they had fired me. It was probably late February-ish, maybe March, when I had that, interview with the two subordinates and found out about dumping. So, from then to when they fired me, actually progressed pretty quick. I didn't really know what to do when they fired me. They did what a lot of companies do. They again tried to use their power as the one with the money to try to control what I would do when they fired me. They offered me a severance package. It was a pretty good severance package. It was $42,000. It was executive placement. It was some continuation of some of my benefits. And all I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement. And in the non-disclosure agreement, it said that I agreed not to file a whistleblower case. Mm-hmm. And, as soon as I saw it, I knew I couldn't do it. And I remember, some people questioning that thinking of mine, because you still got to provide for a family.
So were you nervous when you made the decision? Yeah. You were. Did it take a lot of forethought? Did you ever think I shouldn't do this because of my family?
It didn't take forethought. I knew what I had to do, and I knew regardless of the personal consequences, this was what I had to do. I could not let these people continue to endanger our country. And I knew that no matter what happened to me, I had to go through with what I had started, and that was stopping this from going on. I did not want to see my family suffer, and I remember discussing it with my wife, and she's always backed me up. We've been married now for 32 years, but that was the part that caused me the greatest angst, was watching my family suffer for a decision that I had made. So I turned down I didn't turn down their severance package. They actually handed it to me over the hood of the moving truck, because I had to move out of Western Pennsylvania. They handed me this huge severance package, and they told me that I had 21 days to return it. And I knew the first thing I had to do was talk to a lawyer. And thank goodness I had kept in touch with a buddy of mine from Alabama, and I called him, and he said, can you fax me the paperwork? So I faxed it to him. And
did you have a lot of evidence at the time?
I did. I'm a very meticulous person. Some people call me anal. I don't like going into a business meeting and not being prepared. So every memo that I had ever done or received with USIS, I kept on a flash drive. I still had that. And so, you know, I asked for legal advice. The lawyer that I was talking to was a one-man shop. He then referred me to the largest law firm in Alabama. It's Beasley Allen Law Firm in Montgomery. And the day that I went over and sat down with them, I tell this story in my book, and it, to me, it's very funny. The lawyer sitting across from me he ended up being my lawyer, and his name's Larry Golston, and Larry's sitting across from me, and I tell him I probably spent an hour and a half laying out, you know, what I had gone through, what was going on at USIS, and then I stopped, and Larry stood up across the table, and he said, "Mr. Percival, what you have told me is classic whistleblower retaliation, but can you prove it? Where are the bodies buried?" You know, he was speaking metaphorically. Mm-hmm. But I stood up, and as I reached in my pocket and pulled that flash drive out, you could almost see spit coming out the side of Larry's mouth. Larry got very excited because he knew that I had something. Mm-hmm. And he knew that what I had told him was something very important to our country. And he began scrambling, getting somebody to bring in a computer for us to put the flash drive in and getting a projector. And I showed him probably hundreds of documents, and I laid out for him. I had proof of the emails that they had sent me. I had proof of the numbers of cases they were completing. And then the other proof that I had was I had the proof of how many people were working there and how many cases they were supposed to be working on a day. And it doesn't take a man with more than about an 8th grade education to sit down and say this number of people could not physically do this number of cases. And looking back on it also, the U.S. government had realized that. They had realized about the time that I went to Western Pennsylvania that it was not physically possible for USIS to be delivering the number of cases they were, but they didn't know how they were doing it. They didn't know how to interpret the data that they had, and they needed somebody to come forward and explain it to them, and I ended up being that person.
Mm-hmm. So you went to the Department of Justice.
I did, yeah. I hurried my family out of Western Pennsylvania. We filed my case in Alabama on July 1st of 2011, and there are a couple key things I want to point out from the case. So it was filed July 1st of 2011. It was filed under seal. The U.S. attorney was briefed on the case, so he knew what I was alleging. Every 60 to 90 days after that, the Department of Justice would come to me through my lawyers and ask for a continuance of keeping it under seal so they could continue to investigate. The first couple times they did it, I understood, you know, it was a massive allegation I was making. They had a big investigation to do, but this continued. And it got to the point to where I wondered if they were ever going to move on with the case. And now, looking back at it, I'm not so sure they would have if some key things hadn't happened that make my case very interesting to people. In June of 2013, a guy named Edward Snowden fled the United States to China with a lot of U.S. secrets. So Congress started holding hearings on how did Edward Snowden get a security clearance? Well, guess who did the background investigation? USIS. Yeah. So it happened that his case went through during the time that USIS was dumping. And right on the heels of that, another famous case happened in September of 2013. A guy named Aaron Alexis went to the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., murdered 12 people, and committed suicide.
Yeah, that was really awful. I know he apparently believed he was a targeted individual, and I don't know what made him make that decision other than he was trying to bring attention to it, but that's a horrible way to do it. Absolutely horrific.
And you know, again, his case was processed by USIS while they had this process of dumping. And so, you know, Congress was really involved. And I remember watching, it was probably the first time ever in my life I watched a C-SPAN broadcast on purpose. And I remember hearing Congress talk about it. And one of the questions that they asked was, did they have any concerns with the background done on Edward Snowden? And I believe they were asking the Office of Personnel Management and Investigator General. And his answer was, he had concerns with the company that had conducted it, and he was referring to my case that I had filed 2 years earlier. And so anyway, so that hearing and all was in September of 2013, and then in October of 2013, the United States government intervened in my case. That means they took over the prosecution of it. A lot of things happened directly after that, but whistleblowing is not you don't get a quick resolution in a whistleblower case normally. My case then drug on until December of 2015.
It's like 4.5 years.
Yeah, 4.5 years. And at the end, I won, and I got a multi-million-dollar settlement, and the bad guys were put out of business. There are a couple key things from the case. One, when the U.S. government did the investigation that my case spurred, they found that USIS had committed fraud on at least 665,000 background investigations. Wow. And that these background investigations went back as far as 2008. There are two famous ones in the time period, and that's Edward Snowden and Aaron Alexis. But we don't know who the other 664,998 people are. And Americans ought to be demanding that our government go back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go back and determine who these people are, where they are, and what job they're doing within the government now. It's not that necessarily those people's fault, and all of them, aren't in the same class with the famous people that I named or notable people that I named. But we ought to go back, find out who they are, and reinvestigate.
Yeah, that's very concerning. You just never know who's working in what position. I mean, Edward Snowden was at the NSA, and there's just people at very high positions. I mean, in some ways, I regard him for bringing attention to this over surveillance of America. But when you listen to a story, I was curious myself, how did this guy get a clearance, a security clearance? Because he's a bit of an outlier, to say the least. And so it didn't make sense to me. He didn't seem like government material. I'll just say that. He was a hacker. He only finished high school, and I think he did go to a junior college or something after. But it's just interesting because that's just not the typical person that the U.S. government would hire in a normal situation.
Right. And, and I'm not saying he couldn't have passed a background investigation. I'm saying that there's a high probability that his background investigation was not done correctly. Mm-hmm. It was at the very least done during the time frame when USIS was dumping background investigations, and they can't show that his background investigation was reviewed correctly. Mm-hmm. So,
and then before we talk about, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go right ahead.
I was just going to say, before we get into discussing your book, I was just going to ask you, did you have any harrowing experiences during the 4.5 years? What happened during that 4.5 years? That must have been very stressful for you and your family.
It was the most stressful time in my life. And I know imagine. That unintentionally it was passed on to my wife and children. I know that we were being surveilled at one point. I know that at one point my laptop was tapped. I know that I was blackballed in my chosen profession. Before I went to USIS, I had been a police officer. I'd been a military police officer. And then, with them, I worked my way up as an investigator to one of the highest positions in our land as far as background investigations. And I found myself not being able to make ends meet. I ended up working 3 different jobs, stocking grocery shelves, working midnight shift as a magistrate in Montgomery, Alabama, and then working an entry-level investigator job for one of the companies that was a competitor of USIS. So, quite a tumble. And I remember me and my wife having, numerous conversations about, we just got to put our nose down and continue the road that we've started down. And
And you actually had to
thank
move in with
goodness
your
we did.
mother-in-law. That's another piece that I was like, my goodness, it's really
with
affecting
my with my mother. Yeah, and there's a I mean, I look back on it, and quite honestly, when my wife reads the quote I'm about to refer to, it makes her cry, but uh, it sometimes times does me as well. But I remember, I'm now 53. I remember in my mid 40s when this was going on. uh, we were in our bed in my mother's living room with a sheet hung over the door so that we could have some privacy. And I remember making the statement to my wife, gee, I bet you never thought you'd end up in your 40s living in my mother's living room. And to be a person trying to do the right thing and find yourself in such a desperate situation is a really tough place to be in.
And there was no
But
guarantee
we
that you'd be rewarded anything. That's the other thing people need to
absolutely,
understand.
absolutely not. And the other thing that I would say is, going into it, I basically had to write a check for $42,000 to get the ball rolling, in that I had to give up my severance package. I had to go from a six-figure salary to unemployment. And think about this, as a whistleblower, when I went to the unemployment line, I couldn't tell them why I was fired. When I applied for a new job, I could not explain to those employers why I was fired. That's a tough spot to be in. But anyway, I talk a lot more about that in my book. Um,
Yeah,
and
let's
and
get
I
to
one of
that.
my
So go ahead. I'm very
okay.
curious, the process, what's in the book, because of course it's not released yet. So I didn't have the
Yeah,
opportunity to read it prior to our interview. So I'm excited
I'll
I'm going to get your book.
I'll make sure you get a copy.
Thank you.
So anyway, once the case resolved, um, I still felt a duty to make sure that everybody knew what happened, because a lot of what happened in my case happened behind closed doors. And in the end, another thing that was shocking to me is nobody was ever criminally prosecuted. Nobody went to jail. USIS paid the government a little over $30 million to make this go away, and it went away. So now that the case has resolved, I've written a book, and it's called Holding On to Integrity and Paying the Price. I've on purpose held the release date for March 2nd. Um, I know nobody knows this, but March 2nd is the 157th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln signing what's known as the Lincoln Law, which was the first whistleblower law. He signed it in 1863, and he did it because the U.S. government was having trouble with profiteers selling things to the United States Army that wouldn't work in wartime. And so they set up a more or less a bounty situation where, if you turned in somebody defrauding the government, you were entitled to a percentage of it. And it's called the Keatam statute. And that's the statute that I used to go after USIS. So anyway, on that date, the book will be released. It is available now on pre-orders. If you go to
Will you
blakepercival.com/store.
spell it for people?
Sure, BLAKEPERCIVAL, blakepercival.com. Anyway, if you order one, if you pre-order one, it's a collector's edition, and I'll autograph it for you and put you a nice little note in it. We're planning a book tour now. We've got quite a few places that we'll be announcing here in the very near future that we're going on the book tour. My manager is Judy Wilkinson. Her email is jlwilkinsonconsulting@gmail.com, and she's putting together the list of where we're going to do book signings. And if anybody would be interested in us coming to your area, reach out to Judy, and it's completely possible that I would come there, talk about the book, and do a book signing. In
Wonderful.
conjunction, in conjunction with that, I set up a nonprofit. And, we were talking just a second ago about struggling as a whistleblower. Um, I'm not a doctor. I can't do anything about cancer. Um, But I believe that we all walk the walk that we walk in life, and when we learn about something that's not right, we should address it. And I ran across something as a whistleblower that I think is truly not right, and I'm trying to address it by creating this nonprofit. So earlier I was talking about, when the government intervened in my case, and then there was still 2.5 years left before I ever saw any money from it. At that point that they intervened, the United States government in whistleblower cases has a 95% recovery rate. But I was still left to twist in the wind and work 3 jobs for 2.5 more years. And that's just not right. The government knew they owed me millions of dollars, but I couldn't get a penny. I approached some of these finance companies that'll finance, the outcome of a court case. Quite honestly, a lot of them are crooks, in my opinion. They want 40% interest. Basically what they told me is whistleblower cases are too risky. They would not, get involved. So I set up the Whistleblower Assistance Fund. In the very near future, it may be up now. You'll be able to go to whistleblowerassistancefund.org. Right now, you can find the Whistleblower Assistance Fund on Facebook. It's been set up as a nonprofit, and our hope is that we can generate a fund that when there's a needy whistleblower out there and finds themselves in the position I did, where they, have done the right thing and now they're weathering the time period to when they actually see a payback from it, that we can give them a monetary gift with no strings attached. And that's the purpose of the fund. And if anybody out there would like to help it, we'd appreciate any donations you would entertain doing.
Sorry about
the
that. I was
whistleblower
muted
assistance.
again. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I was
That's
asking
all
how
right.
people can do that. So
Yeah.
these are your answers.
So again, they can go through the Facebook site, or they can go to whistleblowerassistancefund.org. I think it's up now. If it's not, it will be here in the very next day or so. I would like to, if I could, thank the people that stepped forward as directors for the Whistleblower Assistance Fund. We have Cecil Jackson out of Jay, Florida, Heather Repchetta out of Colorado, Cal Percival in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The secretary is my daughter, Ashley Hotard, and the treasurer is my son, Travis Percival. So I really appreciate all these people helping me out. Again, it's to address what I think is something that I can make a difference in.
What you did was a very highly noble act, and I always appreciate people like you. And just to kind of go back to a certain point I was wanting to make is I've interviewed many whistleblowers. I've been very lucky, Colleen Rowley, John Carricow, Bill Binney, and all these various ones. And one thing they've all said is that no one ends up spending any time. No one goes to prison. And that's very bothersome to me.
It is. It is. And I am going to carry the title, if you will, of whistleblower for the rest of my life. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know I was getting that title when I started the process. But part of my purpose in writing my book is, if I'm going to be known for what I did, I'd like everybody involved in this to be known for what they did. And I believe that I've written a very good book that tells the whole story, lays it out in such a way. To write a book about something like this was kind of difficult. A lot of the major publishers wouldn't touch it, wouldn't touch the story. And I engaged a law firm to vet the book. They actually read it 5 times. We came up with a very creative way to talk about what we talk about, and we included some federal documents in it as proof of what I had to say. So I think if everybody will, get a hold of the book, I think you'll enjoy it, and I think it's will be something encouraging for people.
Mm-hmm. And one thing also, it seems as if with time, being a whistleblower, before it seemed like treason, or there was a negative connotation with being a whistleblower. So that has changed, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I agree. If you look back at the earliest days of our country, I think the first whistleblower was like in 1777. We had not been around very long, when the need arose for a whistleblower, and the need still arises every day. It's something that we have to have that avenue for people to tell the rest of us what's going on behind closed doors.
We need some checks and balances, and we need oversight, and it's up to us, the American people, and people that are employed to pay attention to these things. And there's no other way to do it. If things are not being resolved, it's your duty as a patriot, as an American citizen, to come forward so we can rectify the situation.
You're correct. And, being a whistleblower is not easy. But like you said, it's something that we have to have. A lot of the things that go on behind closed doors, if they were exposed, we'd all be shocked. And you
Blight, thank you so much for this interview, and thank you for being a person of integrity. And I'll see you guys next week, and this will be posted on my website, agoodplacewithella.com.